All right, perfect. So, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this month's Spotlight Talk. Again, my name is Ethan Snyder, and I'm the Manager of Collections and Public Programs at the Esherick Museum. So, before we kick off today's conversation, I want to introduce our special guest. And today we're so pleased to be joined by Ann Glasscock, who is the Associate Curator and Decorative Arts Specialist at the Taft Museum of Art in Cincinnati, Ohio, where the crafted world of Wharton Esherick is currently on view through September 7th. Anne has been really closely involved in this exhibition from the beginning and has contributed a really wonderful essay to the catalog entitled For All the World to See, presenting the work of Wharton Esherick. And Anne's nuanced essay explores Wharton's journey to becoming a kind of leading figure and exemplar of American craft through his major exhibitions. So we'll be learning more about Anne during today's conversation, so I don't want to give too much away. But just to give a little brief overview, before beginning at the Taft Museum of Art, Anne worked at the Chazen Museum of Art in Madison, Wisconsin, so small world, the Chipstone Foundation in Milwaukee, as well as the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Anne received her master's in art history from Temple University and her PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. However, if you'll bear with me for a minute, I do want to share something that isn't necessarily capturable through a professional bio or CV line. So I had the pleasure of working alongside Anne and her team in the lead up to this exhibition's opening and in person during the installation in Ohio earlier this summer. And throughout our experience working with her, Anne has consistently brought such a deep level of care, thoughtfulness, and interest to Esherick's work and legacy. Anne joins us at the Wharton Esherick Museum and our team in her dedication to expanding the narrative around Wharton Esherick, his family, work, and legacy. And finally, Anne is a wonderful leader of an equally wonderful team that has been taking great care of our collection and has found lots of inspiration from their time working with it. So if you don't have a chance to make it out to see the crafted world while it's at the Taft Museum of Art, please don't let that ever stop you from visiting. It's a wonderful museum. They steward an incredible building, collection, and one of the things that I found most spectacular about being there were 8 monumental murals by one of the few African American Hudson River School painters, Robert Duncanson. So without further ado, I think we can start to kick off our conversation. So, Anne Glasscock is no stranger to Wharton Esherick's life, work, and legacy. So, can you tell us a little bit about your exposure to and engagement with the artist through your career as a scholar and decorative arts specialist?
Sure, but first, let me say thank you, Ethan. I mean, you've been a pleasure to work with as well. I think it was just lovely having you at the Taft and your help overseeing the installation of the exhibition and your knowledge was certainly invaluable. So we really enjoyed having you there as well. Um, yeah, so thank you for those kind words again. And as Ethan mentioned, just a little bit. Esherick seems to keep creeping back into my life. So in 2010, I moved to Philadelphia. My husband and I moved there. I started a master's program at Temple University. And the summer after my first year, I took on an internship at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And I think, Ethan, you have a photo. Um, do you have my slide presentation?
Yeah, I can share that right now.
Okay. So I saw the beautiful fireplace and doorway in the Philadelphia Museum of Art's galleries. And even though I saw it, I don't think I really saw it until a curator pointed it out to me during that internship. And my husband and I decided to go to the Wharton Esherick Museum because we didn't know how long we were going to be in Philadelphia. And so hopefully he doesn't mind me showing this kind of funny photo of him near Esherick's kind of expressionist style outhouse. But we wanted to go to this place, Wharton Esherick Museum. It turned out to be amazing. We fell in love with it. We really were fascinated by Wharton Esherick. And so After I graduated from Temple, I worked at Freeman's Auction House. Occasionally, we would see pieces, or we would go to a Rego auction, and again, we would see pieces there. So, Esherick kept popping up. And then if you go to, I think the next slide. Yeah, so Esherick popped up again about 5 years later when I was working on my dissertation at the University of Wisconsin. I wrote about a silversmith who was in the same show as Esherick, the Masters of Contemporary Art show in 1961 at the Brooklyn Museum. So the silversmith is Hudson Reuscher, and I have a photo of him in the next slide. Oh, thank you. And he worked from the 1930s through the 1970s, same time as Esherick. They probably knew each other. I'm not sure, but it's a small world, and chances are they did. But Reuscher made silver for both secular and sacred institutions and individuals. And so here's just kind of a selection of some of the things in that exhibition. So that's how kind of I know Esherick. And again, he's creeped up in my life again at the Taft. So I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah. So now I want to ask you a little bit about this wonderful essay that you contributed to the catalog.
Mhm.
Um, your essay in this catalog covered some of the major exhibitions that Esherick had in his lifetime and many of the ways that his work was received by critics and visitors and things like that. So could you talk to us about a little bit more about what you cover in this essay and your research, how your research interests kind of inform Esherick as someone who is exhibited to the world to see?
Yeah, so I think in terms of my research interest, again, it probably started with this 1961 Contemporary American Craft Show because I had all of the research, the archival materials from the Brooklyn Museum. I had read all of the press about the show. I had all of the photographs from the archives, and I knew how it was received, and I knew that Esherick was a part of that show, just one of eight craftspeople to be represented. And I'd also, heard from various people him being described as this, lone craftsman working in the Pennsylvania wilderness. And while that may be true, I also knew that he was part of these major exhibitions. And he was part of the 1940 World's Fair, and I love World's Fairs. And I just learned that he had been a part of almost 50 shows even before his big 1958 retrospective. And I know this because Ethan was very kind to photograph tons of archival materials in the Wharton Esherick Museum archive for me so I could work on my essay. So I cover those shows, and I talk a little bit about Objects USA and how that was such an impactful exhibition in terms of getting the work of craftspeople out into the world and for allowing people to kind of understand that these utilitarian works of art are also, um, they are works of art. They are fine works of art. And I don't think Esherick ever really knew how amazing he was during that time, just based on what I read as he kind of participated in all these exhibitions. But he really did get himself out there in ways that I don't think people normally think about. So that's really what's covered in my essay. But
Yeah, I really appreciated in the essay that you recognize that the work around Esherick today that is trying to expand the story and kind of do away with the mystique of him as this lone craftsman really starts with some of those early exhibitions where people, and especially those first critics, really wanted to start painting this particular picture of Esherick that we are now trying to demystify for the public.
yes, and I think you're doing a great job of that.
Yeah. So now I want to ask you a little bit about the institution that you work with today. So, for those of us who aren't so familiar with the Taft Museum of Art, can you tell us a little bit about your collection and the history of this institution and the building?
Sure.
Imagine going to the next slide now.
Yes, thank you.
Mm.
So here is a image of the exterior of the Taft Museum of Art, and I've worked there for about 8 years. It's an amazing place. It's on the list of National Historic Landmarks, but it is named after our co-founders, Charles and Anna Taft. So it became a museum in the early 1930s after they passed away, but it was a museum, or it was a home before that to several prominent Cincinnati families. And so if we go to the next slide, the first family that lived there was Martin and Ann Baum. He was a merchant. He was successful for just a short time until he got into some financial trouble, and unfortunately had to sell the house in 1825. And in the next slide, there's a picture, again, of the exterior, but this just shows what the house looked like in 1820 around that outline. So it was just a simple four-sided building. And then in the next slide, we have an image of the second family that lived there. Nicholas Longworth and his family moved into the home in the early 1930s, and he expanded upon what is now the Taft Museum of Art, added some wings. He was a lawyer. He was from Newark, New Jersey. And he was also kind of investing in real estate and making a lot of money. And he had two passions outside of those things, art and horticulture. So he was known as the father of American winemaking. And he was also collecting a lot of works of art. And Ethan mentioned the murals in the museum, and we can see those here in this next slide. So Longworth commissioned the young African American painter Robert S. Duncanson to paint these murals about 19 or 1850, excuse me, and they're now considered the most significant pre-Civil War domestic murals in the United States. So we're really happy to have those here at the Taft. So next up in our history, in our next slide, this is just the third kind of family who lived there, David Sinton and his wife. And he made a lot of money in the iron industry and also invested in real estate. And we can go to the next one. And when he passed away, the home was given to his daughter, Annie. So this is Charlie and Annie, Charles and Anna Taft, our museum co-founders. And they lived in the home until they passed away in late 1920s, 1930. So in the next slide, we have portraits of the two of them. So Charles was in politics. He also was the editor of the Times Star magazine. And then in the next slide, you might have heard of his half-brother, William Howard Taft. He accepted the presidential nomination on the steps of the Taft. So you can see it kind of far off into the distance there, the huge crowd of people in the foreground. And then in the next slide, this is just to mention Anna again and how she really amassed millions. When her father, David Sinton, passed away, she became the richest woman in Ohio. And so in the next slide, we have some of the art collection that her and her husband started to form. So they bought old master paintings. Next, they bought over 200 Chinese porcelains, including a lot of blue and white Kangxi porcelain. Next, they focused on buying French Renaissance Limoges enamels. So we have one of the best collections in the world of those pieces. And then next. And then this is my favorite gallery, the Tiny Treasures Gallery. And so we have a number of Chinese painted enamels, European decorative arts, and then 17th and 18th century watches. Then next, and then the Tafts also bought a lot of paintings by kind of contemporary at the time artists. We have a Whistler piece, a Sargent, Henry Farney, Frank Duveneck on display as well. I think we can go to the next one. Yeah, so I think I'll pause there. But I think yeah, that kind of gives you a nice overview of what the Taft is all about. We also have a couple big exhibition spaces, including the one gallery where the Wharton Esherick show is on display.
Yeah, so I think I'm setting us up a little bit for this next question, but I think taking us through the history of the Taft is reminding me how wonderful it is that a collection from one historic home can travel to two different other historic homes. One, historic artist space at the Brandywine Museum of Art, and then another type of model of historic home here at the Taft Museum of Art.
Mhm.
So I think that you've touched on this a little bit, but could you talk about some ways that you see the crafted world and Wharton Esherick's work in general kind of being in dialogue with the space that it's in at the Taft?
Yeah, so I think there are two kind of easy connections you can make between the Taft and Esherick. Um, One being that the museum is kind of filled with it's kind of amazing craftsmanship, especially in terms of the architecture. You have this beautiful plasterwork ceiling in the dining room. We have fireplace mantles that were carved wooden mantles in the early 1800s throughout the entire house. But we also have a number of pieces of amazing Federal era furniture in the galleries as well. And then second, the Taft Museum of Art was once a home. And I think that's a nice connection too, given that the Wharton Esherick Museum was once a home. Now you can't see Charles and Anna's bedroom or the kitchen or anything like that, but you can see and appreciate the works of art that they had on display.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for those of you, or for those who aren't aware, you steward both the original collection of the Tafts, and you also still actively acquire a little bit as well.
Well, we don't really acquire.
Okay.
We are basically set up to display their collection and their collection only. And we occasionally will accept gifts if they make sense to integrate into the galleries. But yeah, unfortunately, we don't acquire. I wish we did. I
Yeah.
would love to buy things.
Okay. Yeah. So one thing that I was really struck by in your version of the crafted world at the Taft is the way that you contextualized Esherick's pieces within Cincinnati's really rich history of industrial arts and wood carving in particular. So I'm hoping you could talk to us a little bit about that today because for those who haven't gotten a chance to go out to Cincinnati, we might be missing some of that context ourselves.
Yeah. So if you want to kind of just go through the next few slides, I'm showing some nice pieces that we have in our collection. So people can go see these beautiful Federal era works after they see the works in the Esherick exhibition. So Duncan Five table, Michael Allison sofa, and then this Porter Clay sideboard. But then also, as Ethan mentioned, there's a more local story as well. And so this piece was made in Cincinnati in the 1800s. And so I wanted to do kind of a local story panel in the exhibition. So when I first started thinking about it, I thought, this is great. I'll see who was making furniture at the same time Esherick was in Cincinnati. And of course, there wasn't anyone really. There weren't any major companies. But I knew that there was this long history of the art carved furniture movement in Cincinnati in the 1800s. And so, with this company, for example, hundreds of people were working there, carving beautiful pieces like this. And then I have a couple other examples as well. just to let people know about this history in our town. And so Henry and William Fry were making these art carved chairs and tables. And then in the next slide, we have Ben Pittman, who's designing pieces like this bed. And he was a teacher. He was teaching wood carving at the Art Academy, and a lot of his students were women. And they really helped beautify homes throughout the city. And you can see Adelaide Norse and Elizabeth Norse were both carvers and painters who contributed to this bed. And then in the next slide, things kind of wrap up in the early 1900s in terms of the furniture companies in Cincinnati. The Shop of the Crafters was kind of the last large successful business in the area. Other cities, rival cities, were kind of taking all the business, and um, furniture was being made more in other Midwestern places like Grand Rapids and Detroit. So that was kind of our big um, success in the early 1800s and early 1900s. So not much to share in terms of the 20th century when Esherick was working, but that's totally fine.
For anyone who has a chance to go out, going to see the Cincinnati wing at their Fine
Mhm.
Arts Museum was very inspiring, and getting to learn about just how robust a system of industrial art education that they had in Cincinnati was very inspiring, especially as, we're living in a time today, especially in Philadelphia, as these institutions are starting to close. Yeah. So,
Yeah, yeah. All the pieces that I just showed you are from the Cincinnati Art Museum, and they just have a beautiful display, as Ethan mentioned, and a number of other pieces that are worth seeing as well.
yeah. So before we wrap things up, I want to ask what projects are on the horizon for you, and what future exhibitions do you have in the works?
Sure. So I'm a decorative arts specialist, but I work in a kind of wide range of time periods. So in this next slide, you can see that I'm working on an exhibition of tea. So I kind of do everything from um, early decorative arts to contemporary craft. So we have a number of tea-related objects in our collection. So I'm working on that currently. Also at the same time, I'm working on an exhibition of works by Edie Harper. So I have a slide that shows her and one of her cat paintings. Her name may sound familiar. Her husband is Charlie Harper. He's a really well-known artist and illustrator. But my colleagues and I really want to kind of let her voice shine through. And you can see in the next slide that she worked across a wide range of media. She also painted, was an illustrator, and then she was a photographer. And I'm focusing on her crafts. So the craft side of her career, the enamels, the weavings, the ceramics. I feel like that story really has not been told. Either they just kind of get glossed over or just not don't get mentioned at all. But weaving was a huge part of her life. And then she made quite a few enamels and dabbled in ceramics too. And so I want to be able to tell that story. So this is a show that's coming up next year.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Do you think that you'll find any familiar names among her exhibiting colleagues?
I hope so.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting if Esherick's name popped up, but we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that that wraps up our formal conversation. So I think we'll open it up for any questions or comments that people have in the Zoom room here. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I can always go back to some different slides if people wanted to take another look.
I think it's been at least over 30 years since I've been in the Cincinnati airport. The first time I was there, I was struck by those large murals, um, industrial type mural.
Mhm.
Do you know if I don't even know what's happened to the airport? Are those murals still part of the airport?
Mhm. Yeah, there are murals that are still there. So I believe the murals that you're speaking of are these mosaic murals that are also featured at Union Terminal, which is the Cincinnati Museum Center. It's a um, beautiful Art Deco building, and it's just filled with these amazing mosaic murals from the Art Deco era. So yeah, you can see some of those at the Cincinnati airport too. Luckily, they're still there. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I see Holly in the Zoom room here, and I know that Holly has been doing some digging into Esherick's commission for the Bach family in the 1930s. Recently did a really brilliant talk about the directions that Esherick took in the 30s after he got back from a trip to Germany, and came across or was able to acquire from, I think it was the Pennsylvania School of Industrial Arts, a sample of Wharton Esherick's class schedule, I guess you would put it. And it makes me wonder what the level of craft and industrial art education was between Philadelphia and Cincinnati at that time, and whether one was kind of holding on to more roots than another. So I'm wondering, I'm curious to explore that later on. And I know that Holly's going to kind of continue doing some of that work.
Yeah, I mean, based from what little digging that I've done when I lived in Philadelphia and what I've seen, again, very little about Cincinnati industrial arts, but I think a lot of similarities, especially in the 1800s. I'm curious what you will find in terms of the 20th century, the early 20th century, and those similarities, maybe. But yeah.
Yeah. Holly, you're still muted. Or here, let me just unmute. There you go.
I know I'm muted. Esherick for sure had a huge exposure to that. I mean, and as someone coming from a very upper class family who I think wouldn't have really sought that out necessarily, and to craft. So I think I find that really, really interesting, and just kind of looking at what public education was like 100 years ago and how that affected, art and craft that was produced decades later.
Yeah. And even thinking about, the fact that the Pennsylvania School of Industrial Art and then also what became the Philadelphia Museum of Art grew out of the kind of purchases from this 1876 centennial in Philadelphia. He started to use those purchases as a teaching collection for students. I wonder what it was that Esherick was seeing as a student from 1876 to then go on in 1940 and even in 1939 to be showing in
Yeah.
World's Fairs himself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and what he was exposed to, the fact that he was exposed to all these things, I think was really impactful upon him too.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
that's not always the case.
Yeah.
Yeah. So can we give a round of applause for Anne for joining us today and sharing her time and expertise.
Well, and thank you, Ethan, for having me. It's been great. Another opportunity to talk about Esherick, so I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Yep.